Hey everybody, Professor Snart here. Happy Monday. Hopefully you had a good weekend. Just checking in, week 2, hard to believe, right, of our online Intro to Creative Writing course. So we want to take a look at our due dates coming up. We'll pop into the units a little bit and just sort of talk about where things are at and where we're going. So always into the due dates. Alrighty, so we had a pretty quick turnaround for Unit 1, but it was not a lot of heavy lifting there. Doing your student homepage, just some basic introductions happening. And now we have Units 2 and 3 due on the same day, which is today, June 5th, Monday, June 5th. Again, I know it's a lot to pile into one very condensed time period, but keep in mind we've taken a 16-week course and compressed it to 5, so in order not to be so jammed up later in the course, especially during our workshop time when we like to have a little bit more time, relatively speaking, and we go right up to the very end of the term, we double up a little bit early on, so sort of a lot of work, a lot of disparate things to be doing, but all in the service of providing us a little bit more flexibility as we get a little bit deeper into the course. All right, so Unit 1, again, just kind of introducing yourself, getting to know your classmates, especially because of the workshop nature of our course, right? You'll be interacting with your peers in every unit and especially within those workshop settings, so it's good to have a sense of who these people are as people, not just as, computer users out there in the interwebs somewhere. So we want to take a quick look then at, and also keep in mind, right, as I said before, we don't want to just look at what's next, but it's what's next after what's next. So you kind of have a sense of the quick turnaround. And again, always looking towards the workshop setting, because you certainly don't want to wait until here to finish up Unit 4 to then just start thinking about writing your short story for the fiction workshop. So you really want to be thinking about that now, and in fact a lot of what we'll do here in the earlier units is, I don't want to say preparation exactly for the fiction workshop, but it's getting some ideas in place about writing generally, but also as we get into Unit 4 about short fiction specifically that you want to think about, right, and actively put into place. So don't treat the workshop as an opportunity to do something totally different from some of the stuff we've learned in previous units. It's your opportunity to practice what we've learned or what we've even done a little bit of in those earlier units. And I'll even give you sort of a preview here. There's no mandate about what kind of short story you have to write or even the length of it. Most people won't write a hugely long piece just for reasons of their time, but also if you're expecting feedback from 4 or whatever people in your group, we have to be conscious of their time as well. So there's no length requirement exactly, right? There's no subject or style or genre requirement outside of short fiction, which is, enormous. But again, we do want to see sort of the ideas that we cover in our course here being practiced. And again, I use that term intentionally. So you're not implementing them because you've learned them perfectly and can now just do them. We practice them, we try them out to see how they work, and then we get feedback in that workshop environment. It actually works out really nicely. So remember, we've also now had the opportunity to look at the so-called rules of creative writing, some guidelines to think about. The last rule being, break any of the rules if you think you need to. But even writers who are really out there, avant-garde, kind of don't seem to be following the rules at all, most of the professional publishing ones, the working writers, certainly still do know the rules, and in fact it's that old adage, you sort of have to know them in order to break them effectively. Still, it holds here. Okay, so into the units themselves. So Unit 2 is a lot about the work of being a writer and sort of how you come up with ideas a little bit, or a place to go for ideas. And it's not that the process of invention stops there, but we often need a place to start. We're kind of it's not even writer's block so much as just how do you get the ball rolling? Because we have ideas, but it's how do we formulate them into a story and not just a bunch of words on the page? So again, we review the rules here that we want to pay attention to, and then have a couple of discussion boards. The why I write is literally that. It's a reflection on like what motivates you to write. And what I want people to be careful of is if your motivation to write, which for many people, this is where it starts, is just like to process emotion or experience or to get things on paper so you can sort of understand them better. That's really good, but that would be sort of a therapeutic form of writing. It's writing largely for you, for your benefit. And it's great, but it's not really the kind of writing that we're doing for this course. It doesn't mean that your writing can't start there, but it has to evolve or morph into something else as well. And that you'll find in the rules here, or I guess here, the difference between therapeutic writing and then what we'll call public writing, or even writing for publication. Even if it's just in theory, you're writing for somebody else to read, even if you're never going to actually submit something, or you don't have that in mind, we kind of do want to write as if we were writing for an audience who doesn't know us. So we can't depend on telling them a story that they experienced firsthand, or that we've already shared with them, or that we just need to get off our chest and they'll be happy that we've done that. So again, you'll find that elaborated in the rules slideshow there. The framing of memory is a discussion board. It's really our first piece of writing, I suppose, outside of the introductions. But it's an interesting, opportunity to overcome writer's block, because you're just writing from your own experience, right? So you don't have to do research. You don't have to develop some narrative that doesn't exist already. You're basically just writing what has actually happened to you. But the important thing to note is that to make it interesting to somebody else, it can't just be the most traumatic thing that's ever happened to you, and we're going to care because we kind of know you and this is a traumatic thing that happened. You have to tell it in a way that's compelling. You have to use interesting language, interesting sentences, and that just doesn't mean long or complex sentences. It means you pay careful attention to, are they long? Are they short? What's the pacing of this? What detail do I start with? Right? You don't have to tell it in chronological order. Maybe you start with the end, the profound end, and then fill in the details kind of working backwards. So you have to take the memory, right, the thing that is, but then shape it in a way that it'll be interesting to anybody, not just to us in the class, but to anybody that might read it that doesn't know you, doesn't know anything about you, etc., etc. So it's interesting to look at the fish in the reflection here. There's the real fish, right, quote unquote, so the real thing that happened to you. But really, for our purposes, the more important one is the so-called fake one, or the trick one, the reflection one, because it's the product of, in our analogy here, of you taking the real and making it something that it, not that it isn't, but presenting it in a way that it didn't just unfold in sequential order, right, to make it interesting to somebody else. So in a strange way, the memory processed through your ability as a creative writer is, for our purposes here, kind of like more important, more real, you might say, than the physically real fish or the physically real events of whatever you want to talk about. And again, I think people are just sort of drawn to the hyperbolic, the dramatic here. So somebody died, somebody had this traumatic thing happen, an illness, whatever. We think, oh, I'll write about that because that will be just intrinsically interesting. And it kind of is, but I would really challenge people, and I'll look for this as I grade them, to write about something that isn't this big, humongous, super profound, moment. So it has to be transformative and charged. It has to be meaningful, but that doesn't mean it has to be the most traumatic thing that's ever happened. Sometimes we just have these really transformative moments, but they're very kind of like small and mundane. And so the challenge for you as the writer would be to take one of those moments and then tell us about it in a way that makes it, right, emotionally charged, that we get why it's important and not just another mundane, everyday kind of example, right? The stuff that people post on social media. Hey, I bought lettuce. Transformative lettuce? Uh-huh. Oh, okay. So you got to tell it in an interesting way. So it's in some ways it's an easy assignment because you're writing from your own experience, but in some ways it's core to the difficulty of being a creative writer, because you have to take that, right, that stuff, that memory, whatever it is, and make it interesting by using the skills of a creative writer that, of course, we're just starting to develop here. Again, thinking through those rules of creative writing, paying attention to, right, gravitating away from the most traumatic, dramatic moment in your life, and saying, if you can't tell us about something that's more everyday, but still transformative and important in some way for your personal history. Okay, so as always, we have our discussion board set up, right, with our post and reply, keeping in mind that we have our double due date system, with noon being the due date for main posts, main work, quizzes, whatever else might be in a unit, and then that extra time towards the end of the day, that second due date at the end of the day for replies. And just one quick note about grading then generally. So like I mentioned before, just for reasons of time, I don't provide tons and tons of feedback. I would be getting stuff back to you after the course is over, right? If I went through every single thing with a really fine-tooth comb. But just in terms of the numbers, so if we have like something out of, let's say, 50 points, our whole course is out of 1,000. So I want you to be really conscious of just thinking of the number that you get back in that raw number sense out of the whole 1,000. In other words, if you were to get, like, let's say, a 40 out of a 50 on a discussion board, per the grading guidelines for discussion boards here, that's really not that bad. It means that you've basically done the work. You obviously did it on time. You maybe didn't develop replies very fully or elaborate as much as you could, developing specifics within a post, or who knows, it might be a number of things, but it's still a good, competent post, and certainly, right, will serve you well over the breadth of the course. But if you then do the translation in terms of, 40, oh my God, that's an 80, oh my God, that's a low B, why didn't I get 45, that would be an A, oh my God, I want an A. I get it, I was a student too, so trust me, I know. But then you're talking about 5 points out of a whole 1,000 for the course. So you lose sight of, like, the forest for the trees. Is that how you're supposed to say that? But you get the idea. You get so in the weeds or granular about your grade, you kind of lose that big picture, which is, of course, ultimately what we want to keep our eye on, right? The big picture of our whole course together. So 40 out of 50, it's not really a B or an 80%. It's 40 points out of that whole 1,000 for the course, right? Do the math. It's really insignificant, let's say. Not that the work itself isn't, but getting too hung up on 40 versus 45 or 44 or whatever, like 1 out of 1,000 points, I can't really explain why it would be that way. I don't tend to grade even on those micro levels. It's like 40, 45, and then 50 is really like the gold standard, reserved for posts which clearly took some time to develop, that bring in lots of threads, that quote, that develop specifics, that expand on those specifics. So 40 and 45 are pretty standard grades for discussion boards, ones that are like competent, they get the work done, ones that maybe go just a step beyond that, but always just think of those in terms of the raw number out of 1,000. So I know, easy for me to say on this end of it, but it's really our workshops that have most of the point value, and the points for those, as I'll discuss in a later announcement, are largely operational or practical. They're about, did you post on time? Did you make a good faith effort in creating an interesting story or poem or whatever for us to read? And then it's also mostly about the quality of your feedback to other people. So if you're nervous about, I've never written a short story, or I suck at poetry or whatever, and you're going to get a bad grade for that, forget about it. You're totally not. What I care about is your investment. You're doing stuff on time. That's a no-brainer. But your investment in that kind of workshop dynamic of providing people with meaningful feedback. So this is an intro to creative writing course. We learn stuff and we try it out. Maybe it doesn't work and you shouldn't be punished for that. So if you're nervous about that part of it, don't be. But also, again, keep in mind that in the broad scheme of things, we're talking about points out of a whole 1,000. So don't get too hung up on the 1 to 5 point differences. Again, I know, easy for me to say, but trust me on that one. Okay, if you do have questions, concerns, comments, you can always be in touch with me, and I will talk with everybody soon.